Hi, I'm Vanessa Lim with the San Francisco Regional Office. In this third video on employee elections, we will discuss election procedures in the actual election. So, the parties have signed an election agreement or the regional director has directed the election. What happens next? It depends on the type, whether it's a manual, mail, or e-voting election. But there are some basic procedures that apply to all elections. 1. The FLRA conducts and supervises the election. 2. All elections are by secret ballot. 3. Prior to the election, eligibility lists are updated to reflect any personnel changes, shared with the parties, and then any disputes are handled through the challenged ballot process. And finally, prior to the election, the agency posts a notice at the workplace and via email or intranet, however the agency normally communicates with employees. The notice explains the election details, including the unit description and who's eligible to vote, the election method, and the date and time. In mail and manual elections, it also includes a sample ballot. For e-voting elections, the notice describes the available voting choices. So what does a ballot look like? In a simple election with only one union on the ballot has one question. Do you want to be represented by Union X for the purpose of exclusive representation? The choices are simple, yes and no. If there is more than one union on the ballot, each union will be listed as a separate choice, as well as a checkbox for no union. Also, as mentioned in previous videos, elections are different if the employees you are trying to represent include both non-professionals and professionals as defined by the statute. If the unit includes both, each group will receive different ballots. The non-professionals will receive a ballot with the choice between one or more unions and no union. The professionals will be asked two questions. First, if they wish to be included in a bargaining unit with non-professionals, and second, if they want to be represented by a particular union. Another important thing is that the agency is required to remain neutral during the election process, but the parties can agree on electioneering issues such as campaigning and distribution of election materials. The FLRA does not police these agreements, and any objections regarding electioneering will not be investigated until after the election, except in rare circumstances. Regardless of any agreement between the parties, there are specific rules the parties must follow, especially with on-site elections. A typical on-site election involves one site and one FLRA agent. However, this depends on the number of voters and where they are located. When the election is at one site, the parties will have previously agreed to the location, often a large conference or training room. The FLRA agent will ensure that signs are posted in the area, that the room is set up properly, and that everything is in order for the election. Each party is allowed an equal number of election observers. The number depends on how many FLRA agents and voters there are. The agent meets with the observers prior to the polls opening to explain their role, and observers may not wear campaign insignia or electioneer during their observer shift. Once the polls open, the parties are not allowed to electioneer in the area around the polling place. When employees enter the polling place, they give their name to the observers, who then cross-check their name on the eligibility list. If the employee is on the list, the agent will give them a ballot to vote. The employee then returns the ballot to a secure box monitored by the FLRA. If they are not on the list, they will be directed to an FLRA agent. The agent will try to identify why they are not on the list and discuss it with the employee. If the employee still requests to vote, they will be given a ballot which is placed in a challenge envelope prior to going in the ballot box. After the polls close, the FLRA tallies the ballots. This is a public process and anyone can now enter the polling place to observe. First, the FLRA attempts to resolve any challenge ballots. If the parties agree the person is eligible, the ballot is removed from the challenge envelope and mixed in with the other ballots. If the parties agree the person is ineligible, the envelope is set aside and not opened. If the parties cannot agree, the ballot will also not be counted. The agent will mark the envelope as unresolved and place it in a separate envelope. At this point, the FLRA agent tallies the ballots. The election is determined by a majority of valid ballots cast and is not based on the number of employees eligible to vote. If there is more than one union on the ballot, a union must still receive a majority of the votes cast to win the election. If no choice gets a majority, a runoff election will be held between the two choices receiving the highest number of votes. At the end, the FLRA will issue a tally of ballots. For typical mail ballot elections, the FLRA mails election packets, including voting information, a ballot, and a postage-paid envelope to employees' homes. Employees must sign the outside of the envelope or the ballot will be voided, and ballots must be received by the return date set out in the agreement or the vote will not be counted. Thus, employees should not wait until the last minute to mail their votes and should contact the FLRA if they do not receive their packet. Upon receipt, ballots are securely maintained by the FLRA regional office. When the FLRA tallies the ballots, if observers are present, they are given a list of eligible voters and check off their names as the FLRA agent goes through the envelopes. At that point, they can raise any voter challenges. Using the same process as in manual ballot elections, the FLRA agent attempts to resolve challenge ballots before counting them. After the challenge process is complete, the agent opens the envelopes, mixes the ballots together so they are anonymous, and counts them. Finally, the agent issues the official tally of ballots. Following the tally, eligibility lists are returned to the FLRA agent, and observers are not allowed to maintain the voting record. In typical e-elections, eligible employees are mailed an election package to their home address containing election details and a unique voter identification number. Employees can vote by internet or phone up until the deadline listed in the instructions. Votes submitted after the deadline will not be counted. As with mail ballot elections, employees should not wait until the last minute to vote and should contact the FLRA if they do not receive their packet. At the tally, the FLRA will print a report of who voted. If observers are present, similar to mail ballot elections, observers check off voters' names from the eligibility list and raise any challenges. Unresolved challenges are not counted. However, a record of all votes is maintained in case a challenge ballot impacts the election's outcome. Once that is done, the eligibility list is collected by the FLRA agent. And just as with any type of election, the observers are not allowed to maintain voting records. Once any challenges are resolved or set aside for a later decision, the FLRA generates a tally of ballots and serves it on the parties. In some cases, challenge ballots may turn out to impact the outcome. For example, in a one-union election, if 25 votes were cast for Union X and 20 votes were cast against representation, then there would need to be at least 5 challenge ballots to make a difference. Any less would not affect the outcome because the union would still have a majority of the votes. On the other hand, if there were 5 or more challenge ballots, then the challenge ballots could alter the majority. In this example, the parties would again attempt to resolve the challenges. If the parties are unable to agree, the FLRA determines employee eligibility through investigation, stipulation of fact, or a hearing. However, the FLRA will still issue a tally of ballots on the day of the count, and the objection period begins. So what is the objection period? Once the tally of ballots is served on the parties, they have 5 days to object to the procedural conduct of the election or to conduct that may have improperly affected election results. Objections must be supported by clear and concise reasons, and the objecting party must provide evidence, including signed statements, documents, and other supporting material, within 10 days after the objection's filing. If the regional director determines the conduct described had the potential to interfere with the free choice of voters, then the FLRA can rerun the election. If there are both objections and challenged ballots needing resolution, the regional director can simultaneously investigate both and order a hearing if necessary. The regional director will then issue a decision on the objections and any challenged ballots. In the case of challenged ballots, if the regional director decides the employee or employees are eligible, then those ballots will be counted and a revised tally issued. But the service of the revised tally does not establish a new objection period. In the case of objections, the regional director will either rerun the election or reject the objections and certify the results. If either party disagrees with the regional director's decision, they can appeal the decision to the authority. If no objections are filed and a majority of votes are cast for one union, the regional director will issue a certification of representative. And, as mentioned earlier, if there is more than one union on the ballot and no choice receives a majority, then a runoff election will be held with the 2 choices receiving the highest vote count. If a majority of ballots are not cast for any union, the regional director will issue a certification of results, and a new petition seeking an election cannot be filed for at least 12 months. This concludes our series on employee elections in the federal government. Please remember that each situation is different and there are many issues that can arise during the election process. This is only basic information based on common scenarios. For more information, visit us online where you can find information on topics listed here. And as always, please feel free to contact any of our regional offices for assistance filing your petition and any questions.